as I have not much time, I will synthesize the rest of my talk, which relates to American efforts, volunteer efforts, private efforts in Oman, which began around 1900 when waves of Americans, many of whom were sponsored by the Dutch Reformed Church, went to Oman to assist in efforts pertaining to improving education and health care. Their mission was strictly confined to education and health care. Proselytization was expressly forbidden. A number of schools were founded, and this is at a time when there were no public schools in Oman, only Quranic schools. The schools prospered, as did some of the clinics and hospitals which were founded in the early part of the 19th century, the first one of which was founded by a woman, Mrs. Lewis Canteen. But in this context of American healthcare, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the work of Dr. and Mrs. Donald Bosch, who have become iconic figures in the modern American legacy in Oman. In 1955, Dr. Bosch, an American physician, and his wife Eloise arrived in Oman to lend their hearts, skills, talents, and considerable energies to the daunting task of healthcare. They remained in that country until Dr. Bosch's death some 2 or 3 years ago, and left behind quite an astonishing legacy of goodwill and friendship, turning over their efforts to the newly established Ministry of Health in 1971. Throughout these efforts of both educators and healthcare workers in Oman, Omanis were very much involved and were therefore well placed to assume the reins of these formidable tasks at the beginning of the Renaissance. They were trained by many of these volunteers and were helped in their efforts. Just in closing, the history of U.S.-Omani relations is, of course, a venerable one, a source of pride for people of both nations. From the earliest trade encounters more than 2 centuries ago, to the diplomatic firsts of the 19th century, to the cooperative and largely altruistic efforts of both Americans and Omanis in the decades preceding the Sultanate's transformation into the modern age, it is clear that the foundations of this relationship are on solid ground, even as they continue to grow. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Abdullah Babood. He's the director of the Gulf Studies program at the College of Arts and Sciences at Qatar University. He received his doctorate in international political economy at the University of Cambridge. His PhD was on the European Union GCC relations, and he has continued to focus on that issue, focusing on the Gulf Cooperation Council, its own internal development, but also on its external relations, specifically with Europe. Dr. Babood.
Thank you very much, James. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I want to echo my colleagues and thank the Ministry of Information in Oman, the Embassy in Washington, and the colleagues who've set up this very important event. And I've been asked to come and talk to you here about Oman relations with Iran and the region. In that, I will be talking about how Oman conducts its economic and political relationship with its neighboring Iran, and how it has managed to change this relationship and make it a very cooperative relationship, trying to avert any kind of disputes or military operations in the region, and trying to resolve issues through dialogue and discussions. And also in that, I will also talk about how Oman conducts its relationship within the region. I'm hoping to do all of this in 10 minutes. And I will ask the chair to be a little easy with me. And to understand Oman's relations with its neighbor, I think we need to look at the Oman's map and where it's located. Its relationship with Iran is not new. It's eternal. By geography, by history, Oman is a neighbor of Iran. And throughout history, people have moved between both sides of the Gulf, trading, cooperating, sometimes fighting, and conquering each other. But it is a relationship that has been going on for centuries. And this relationship has also been enforced by Islam, which added a new dimension to that relationship. Now, of course, that historical, geographical proximity, the sharing of the Strait of Hormuz, which controls, through which 1/3 of oil exports passes, is very important. But there is also something more contemporary that helps Oman to deal with Iran, and that is the ever-eternal gratitude that the Omanis and the leadership in Oman have for Iran for supporting Oman against crushing the rebellions in the southern part of Oman, in Dhofar. When Sultan Qaboos took power in the 1970s, he was a young man. The country was devastated because of war. They didn't have enough equipment and military power to defeat the rebels. No other Arab countries has managed to support Oman during that period. Iran stepped in and supported Oman to defeat the rebels. And for that, this is something that Oman can never forget and will ever be eternally grateful for Iran. I think to understand also the relationship, beside the history and what I've just mentioned in geography, it's the vision of the leadership. Oman's leadership, knowing that they live in a very tough environment, very tough region, the Gulf, the Middle East, with all its turmoils, the leadership in Oman chose to pursue one path, and that is the path of peace and coexistence with others, and the settlement of disputes through dialogue and understanding. And the leadership in any country, foreign policy, even in democratic countries, are in the hands of very few. And when it comes to countries in the Gulf, those few become even fewer. So the leadership in Oman has this vision that they want to work with their neighbors. They want to develop the region. They want to avoid any kind of hostilities and coexist with each other. And that's the only way forward. The other way is devastation and wars, and we have seen the results of those. The Gulf region, as you know, has seen, since the British withdrew, many conflicts, very costly conflicts, at least 3 major wars. And those wars and those conflicts are still going on, and military actions and military solutions have never been an answer. Oman believes that through dialogue, through understanding, there could be other ways of conducting international relations. So with the downfall of the Shah and the coming of the Islamic Republic in Iran, Oman has managed to reconcile their relationship with the new government in Iran. Of course, it was a challenge in many ways, because the Islamic Republic wanted to export the revolution when they first started. With the Islamic revolution zealous, they called all the leaderships in the Gulf and the monarchies illegitimate. You all know about the 3 islands that the UAE, that belong to the UAE that Iran captured. So there were a lot of other conflicts that were going on between Iran and its neighbors. And of course, it's support for the Shia population within the Gulf. But Oman chose to isolate these conflicts and put them into perspective. At the same time, try to resolve them through dialogue, through better understanding between the 2 sides. You can't let small, isolated conflicts overshadow the relationship. And this is what Oman has done. So basically, despite sometimes very difficult relationship with Iran, Oman has managed to make Iran a friend, cooperating with Iran, finding ways, making sure that the Strait of Hormuz is open for international navigation, making sure that Iran, that avenues, dialogues is open with Iran, not only now because of the nuclear deal and the nuclear negotiations that Oman has been instrumental, but even in the past, during the Iran-Iraq war, during other conflicts with Iran, Oman has always opened this door carefully, quietly, and diplomatically, helping on the way to make better understanding, where there were prisoners taken either by Iranians or even some Iranians here in the United States that created misunderstanding. Oman has managed to help that relationship and to get those people out of prison. Again, helping in the way of creating a better relationship. Is that for me? 2 minutes? Oh. Okay, just to move quickly, Oman is also part of the Gulf Cooperation Council. And you know the Gulf Cooperation Council do not have cordial relationship with Iran. How Oman has managed to do this is, of course, due to the very skillful leadership that Oman has. On one hand, Oman sees that its future is part of this Gulf Cooperation Council. It's very important for its well-being. Oman is a small country with limited resources. And of course, through regional integration, regional cooperation, this is where it sees its future. However, Oman feels from time to time that perhaps our colleagues in the Gulf do not conduct their relationship with Iran in a way that Oman wants to do it, but also they want to move this relationship beyond what regional integration means. And as you understand recently, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia has announced that he wants to move the GCC Cooperation Council into a union. And of course, this is something that has come in the preamble of the charter of the GCC Cooperation Council. But Oman believes that this is too early to be able to go, and it's a leap into the darkness. We do not know what the union means. How is it going to be conducted? We all have to look at how the European Union has created problems through moving into a union, and seeing some of the difficulties that are happening there. And basically, regional integration theories and discourse tells us that regional integration has to go through certain stages, from a common market, from free trade area, common market, custom union, and then economic and political union. And that only comes when the people are ready, when the systems are ready, when the institutions are in place to be able to do so. But just to make an announcement and promise our people that we're going to go to a union when we cannot, in fact, even deliver, that is something that Oman does not believe in. And therefore, they've been opposing to the union, despite my advice to the Omani government when I was there, talking to them and saying, well, take this and take the ball and run with it, and dictate how the union wants to go. But Oman stood firm and said, we are not for the Union. And in fact, if the Union was to go ahead, Oman wants to be out of this. This is not because of the fact that the Union is to be considered against Iran, although that's part of it, but it's because there is a deep belief that this Union is not based on fundamental, solid basis that is going to deliver to the people. And with that, I end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abdullah. There are times here in Washington when you ask the question, why does Congress do what they do? Don't they get it? If they don't get it, it's not Ken Katzman's fault. Reading the papers that come from the Congressional Research Service makes it clear that available to anyone in government who cares to read them is some of the most disciplined and some of the most thoughtful pieces of analysis on international problems facing and issues facing the United States. And Ken comes by this honestly. I mean, his PhD was in political science from New York University. He served for 4 years as an analyst with the Central Intelligence Agency, writing papers on the Middle East. After a stint in the private sector, he came to work at the Mideast analyst for the U.S. Congress at the Congressional Research Service with an emphasis on Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Persian Gulf states. He's written extensively, was a guest on my TV show at one point, and I enjoyed it, and has done panel discussions as well that we've done together. And so, with Ken, please come forward.
Thank you, James, and thank you to the Embassy of Oman, Ministry of Information, who's hosted me in Oman several times. I appreciate that. It's great at this symposium to be surrounded by people who are so dedicated and have done all this field work in Oman, and I'm just basically a government guy sitting at a desk, and I'm shamed sometimes by that, but that's my job. I appreciated the presentation on these peaceful tools that were used by the ancient Omanis. Since so much of my work, unfortunately, focuses on lethal tools used by modern Omanis, or at least operated by modern Omanis. That's just simply the job. Obviously, defense and security is a big issue. Not that Oman is involved in any hostilities right now, but certainly Oman is one of the countries in the region, and we've just heard how difficult region it is, and so Oman, like the other GCC states, wants to be prepared. Not that there's any imminent hostilities with anybody, but still, this is something that the U.S. and Oman discuss. I've had the luxury, the privilege of following Oman since the early mid-'80s, and right after we signed. Actually, Oman was the first Gulf country to have a formal defense cooperation agreement with the United States, the Facilities Access Agreements of April 1980. And all of the other GCC states have since followed that model in a way. And of course, a few days after we signed those access agreements, these facilities were used for the failed hostage rescue mission in Iran, and that embarrassed Oman somewhat because here they had just signed this agreement and had said that this is not directed against any state in the region. And then, of course, these facilities were used to try to rescue the hostages. So there was a little bit of a difference of opinion. But nevertheless, the fundamental principles of the Access Agreement have held, and it's in both countries' interests. And so these access agreements have been renewed. These facilities, of course, were used to some extent in major combat operations in Afghanistan. After 9/11, they were used to some extent in Operation Iraqi Freedom, which, obviously, I think maybe, Oman had mentioned before Operation Iraqi Freedom was launched that that this could incite revenge in the region and maybe was not the best way to use U.S. military power, but still, having made the decision, the U.S. making the decision, Oman did cooperate in that operation. Since then, and during these operations, there were about 4,000 or so U.S. personnel based in Oman. As these operations have wound down, there is perhaps only a few hundred, mostly U.S. Air Force in Oman that are tending to these facilities to the extent they are still used in various operations, U.S. operations in the region. But again, they're not being actively used in Afghanistan or the new hostilities that are going on in Iraq to anybody's knowledge. So, again, Sultan Qaboos has a philosophy. He was trained in Sandhurst. He sees himself as a defense strategist, a defense thinker. He does not reflexively follow what Saudi Arabia wants to do. He does not reflexively follow what any of the other GCC leaders wants to do. He has his own view and his own approach, but still, obviously he's wanted to be prepared. And, obviously Oman used to be very much schooled, mentored militarily by Great Britain. Obviously, the British, and in fact, the British not only were selling arms to Oman in big numbers, but they were actually in the command structure. There were actual British officers in Oman's command structure for a very long time. That has been phased out. That's no longer the case. It became more of it transitioned first to an advisory mission, and then it's been phased out. Oman is now purchasing a lot of its big-ticket equipment from the United States, F-16s in particular. There are discussions, and Secretary Kerry has openly said there are discussions with Oman on the Theater High Altitude Air Defense system, which is the follow-on to the Patriot anti-missile system. The UAE and Qatar have ordered the system, and Oman might order it. There has not been an announcement of a firm deal yet. Excuse me. So, again, this independent foreign policy, Oman has not gone in the direction that the UAE and Qatar have gone. The UAE and Qatar, they have the same concerns about not wanting to be dominated or dictated to by Saudi Arabia, and the UAE and Qatar have chosen a different approach, which is to undertake these adventures, military adventures in the region, sometimes alone. The Qataris were at the very forefront of getting involved in Libya. The UAE recently undertook its own airstrike in Egypt. In Libya, in cooperation with Egypt, which caused some concern, some consternation. So the UAE and Qatar are going in this sort of very independent direction of a muscular foreign policy. Oman does not want to take Saudi advice and do what Saudi Arabia wants to do, but Oman has not gone in that direction that the UAE and Qatar are going. Oman is still very reserved, very careful about military operations. Oman has not gotten involved in the Syria operation. Oman was not giving money or weapons to the Syrian rebels like UAE, Qatar, and some of the others were. Oman has joined the coalition against the Islamic State in name only and has not really operationalized it to any extent. Oman is not Oman is not conducting bombing raids in Syria. Unlike Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, and Qatar even joined one of the early strikes in Syria. Oman and Kuwait are not joining. So Oman has this independent approach. We've talked about Iran. Obviously, There's been some difference. The Omani relations with Iran have served U.S. interests at times. We've heard about that. At times, it's caused a little bit of a problem, I would say, particularly when the Sultan went to Iran in August 2009, right after the disputed re-election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in Iran. I don't think the U.S. was necessarily that upset with the Sultan going, but the issue was there was a big dispute over the election. The U.S. was taking the side of basically the uprising and said, you know, Iran must not oppress its people. And the Sultan then nevertheless went right as that was going on. So that was a bit of I think, some concern in the USG. But we've heard, you know, how much benefit this relationship. Well, obviously Oman was instrumental in getting the 3 hikers out of Iran that were put in jail. There was an Iranian scientist that the U.S. had put in prison that was sent back to Iran via Omani mediation. Oman hosted the talks, very quiet talks, earlier this year, earlier in 2013, that led to the interim nuclear agreement that was forged in November of 2013 and is still in effect and has now been extended till June 30th. And the Sultan is very interested in continuing to cultivate U.S.-Iran ties very quietly. And you know, these nuclear agreements, they have lowered tensions in the Gulf. I mean, you can see a definite marked lowering of tensions from Iran signing these nuclear agreements and complying with the nuclear agreements. So this has been a benefit, and some of the other Gulf states are now, to some extent, following suit. Sheikh Sabah of Kuwait visited Iran. Rouhani visited Oman. The only GCC state Rouhani has visited himself is the Sultanate. The Saudis are now talking with Foreign Minister Zarif of Iran in New York and other places. That might have been unthinkable a year or two ago. So Oman's approach on Iran has facilitated these ties, and it has succeeded to an extent in lowering the temperature of the Persian Gulf region. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
We'll now take some questions, but before we do, I just have one for each of you, and I'll start with you, Linda. In the piece you wrote in the Frederick Post, you talk about returning after several years and seeing the transformation. What we know is that countries or areas that go through this tremendous change in a very compressed period of time, it creates a shock to the system. And we have all kinds of behaviors that emerge from that shock to the system, sometimes a kind of extremism or fundamentalism, and sometimes an adaptation. Describe, if you will, your sense of where on that scale Oman is today. Do we see people adapting to the changes that have been so rapid, or do we see some social tensions and some difficulties because the Oman of today is so radically different from the Oman of 40 years ago?
Yes, thank you. Wonderful question. The Oman of today is radically different from the Oman of 40 years ago in many, many ways, certainly in terms of infrastructure, in terms of the institutions which have been created and so forth. But the path of modernization in Oman, I think, has differed radically, rather dramatically, from that of many of its neighbors, in that to a large extent it has been evolutionary. It has been pursued with an appreciation of the culture and heritage of the country and its people and its traditions. And the leadership of Oman has not been blindly imitating things Western. Rather, it has been selective in adapting what works for Oman and what does not. In addition to that, I mean, Oman is the only country that has been a country for a very long time in the Gulf. So Omanis have a sense of national identity. There's a feeling of social cohesion. They are, as one of our friends points out, comfortable in their own skins. So changes have been deliberate. I don't think they've been radical. They've been deliberate. And I mean, one just has to go to Oman and look at the landscape. It differs quite dramatically from that of its neighbors. No postmodern glass and steel here. And I think that has lent a degree of comfort and stability to the modernization experience.
Abdullah, one of the things that strikes me going to Oman is this vision of Sultan Qaboos that has found its expression, as Linda describes, even in the architecture of the country. He's the founder of this modern state of Oman. Has that vision been institutionalized? I mean, has it filtered on down? I mean, there's this issue that I've read, Ken, concerns about succession, but is it in the culture now? Has it entered into the DNA of the country that this progression goes forward with this mixture of East and West and mixture of South Asia, Africa, East Africa, and the Arab Islamic culture?
Thank you, James. That's a good question. Let me attempt to answer it.
I don't teach anymore, so I have to use this opportunity to kind of get my good stuff out.
Yeah. I think we have to remember when the Sultan took over, he was young. He was in his 30s. Didn't have much in terms of experience of running a state. And what had happened then is that his vision, along with the people around him, who came from all parts of the world that they had gone to because of lack of opportunities in Oman during the previous rule. They all came back and wanted to build this modern state. And I think this is really what galvanized everybody together, is that here is a young man who wants to see his country change and develop and be part of the growing international community. And here is the Omani population. Some of them were very well educated, worked in neighboring countries, but they never had an opportunity to work in their own countries. Came back. Some of them were even rebellions who gave up arms and joined the Sultan. And they started to build the country together. His vision is inscribed within the institutions of Oman. Not only at the government level, but also at the societal level. You see that the Omanis really want to develop. They understand and accept diversity, given the different ethnic, historical, geographical background of the region. They are at ease with everybody. They're at ease with themselves, comfortable in their own skins, as you said, and proud of their heritage and culture. And they want to build this modern state. So, yes, the Sultan's vision is very important. Yes, it will continue to inspire the people and the youth in Oman. But also the Omani people believe in that vision. It's part and parcel of their current and future aspiration.
Ken, I have a question for you that's actually from the American side as well. We've heard this discussion. Oman is a partner in the GCC, but it's also a bit of a maverick in the GCC. It has a long relationship with the United States, one that it both needs and wants. But, and I speak here as an American, there are sometimes partnership with the U.S. both fulfills a need, but also creates a problem. And we've had that over the last decade. How does Oman deal with that? Is there blowback? There is in some other countries in the region. There's blowback over Israel-Palestine, there's blowback over Iraq, there's blowback over other questions about policy, failed policies in other parts of the region. How does that play out in the U.S.-Omani relationship?
Yeah, Jim, as far as the GCC, I think that's less of a factor. I think in other countries in the region, that's more, you notice that more, you hear that more. I think the GCC, have basically decided, we need these relations with the United States. They've explained it to their people. Several of them have quiet relations with Israel. We all know that's going on. Oman is one of the leaders in that trend. I mean, Oman invited Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres visited the Sultanate of Oman. So Oman has been a leader in, engaging Israel. Not ostentatiously, but very quietly and consistently. And, I joke to some panels, and, there's been talk throughout the years of Yemen joining the GCC, or Jordan joining the GCC, or Morocco, or even Iraq. And it seems to me, I think Israel has a better chance of getting into the GCC than any of those names. Other times I've said, Israel is basically a GCC country at this point. The two, Israel and the GCC, there is almost no daylight in any of their positions, with the exception, obviously, of the Palestinian issue. Okay, but in terms of the strategic, in terms of the strategic picture of the Middle East, and especially in the countries where there is conflict or potential conflict, Israel and the GCC have very, very similar approaches and see eye to eye on these things. So I think the blowback, I just really don't detect it that much.
Thanks. Let's go to the floor for questions. Is there a microphone circulating or not needed? She has the microphone here. Is there a question? And you have one there. Any questions from the floor? Yes, right here, Jafar, and then over here. First go to him, and then over here. We'll take both together, and then we'll take answers. We don't have time for many more. Yeah.
Thank you. I have two short questions. The first one is for Professor Baboud. I thought I heard you say, sir, in your presentation that there was no single Arab country to help Oman stabilize during its war with insurgency. However, Jordanian help was always present, I believe, to the tune that Jordan sent 31 or so Hawker Hunter airplanes from its air force to Oman to do that.
Okay.
I wonder if you can shed some light on that. And the second question is to Mr. Katzman. With the U.S. strategy pivoting towards Asia, will the U.S. face more consolidation of its presence in the Gulf, or will it face the fate of Britain and withdraw either gradually or in some other form in service of its other priorities in Asia?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now over here, a question?
Hi, Alan Frompertz again. I just wanted to hear a little bit. I know, Linda, you didn't get to flesh out some of the connection to the modern period, so I just wanted to hear a little bit more of the material that you weren't able to complete in your talk about the relationship between Oman and the United States more recently. So thank you.
Well, that's about all the time we have. We'll take answers to those three, and that's actually quite nicely done, one for each of you. Let us start at this end with Linda.
Well, actually, I was going
And
to...
I have to ask for 2 minutes each because we're
Thank you.
running out of
I
time.
was actually going to talk more about the specifics of the history of healthcare in Oman, and particularly the amazing strides that the Omanis have made on their own since 1970. With, for example, the U.S. volunteers were so interested in assisting the Omanis in the earlier part of the century, but they have totally taken off. I mean, the World Health Organization has consistently applauded Oman for its astounding efforts in dropping mortality, infant mortality, and others. I mean, in 1970, the average lifespan was 49 years. Now it's close to 80. There are medical cities being built. It really is quite an astonishing situation. In terms of education, again, hundreds and hundreds of colleges and universities, and Omani students being women as well as men being educated at the highest levels, with women actually dominating in universities, and not only in terms of their numbers, but alas, grades very often as well. So, the miracle of the Renaissance in terms of education and healthcare, which had a very small start early in the century, has been really quite remarkable.
Thank you. Abdullah.
Thank you. The question about Arab participation in helping Oman, I
And
totally,
specifically Jordan, I think you mentioned, right?
and Jordan, yeah. I totally agree with you that Jordan had supported Oman. It's probably the only country that has done that. And I think what I meant is Gulf states rather than the wider Arab countries. So yes, thank you for the correction. I was recently talking to Prince Hassan of Jordan, who was there in Oman in the 70s leading the Jordanian troops. And he knew some of the very small villages that even myself coming from that region and from the southern part of Oman did not know. So I was very impressed with his knowledge of the geography in the area. They did not just send a military aircraft, they actually sent a brigade or so, people on the ground, boots on the ground, especially building the roads and making sure that opening the road between Muscat and Salalah was, that kept open during the, especially the Kharif time and the rain season, which was difficult to keep. And Jordanians did a good job. In terms of Oman relationship with the United States, it's of course, it goes through ups and downs, like any relationships. Sometimes the United States do not understand what Oman wants to do, and vice versa. We don't understand sometimes some of the, and I have to admit that I'm talking here from a personal perspective. I don't work for the government, so I don't understand how the government works and function, but my own perspective here is that sometimes we find it difficult to understand United States policies in the region. Nevertheless, Oman has maneuvered between United States policies and interest, Western policies and interest, Iranian policies and interest. Saudi
Let me go to Ken though, if I can, because we're running out of time. And Ken, this question of the well-publicized pivot to Asia causes a lot of consternation, especially in the Gulf. People talk about it, worry about it, and wonder what about us? Where does it go? Give me your assessment of that.
Well, first of all, I would say what pivot to Asia? I mean, yeah, there was an announcement of a possible pivot to Asia, but has not and likely may not, But that said, okay, there's not only worry about that, there's also a worry that, the United States is not as dependent on the crude oil resources of the region and has greatly increased its own oil production. And is that going to lead the United States to make a graceful exit from the region? There's also the issue of, the United States has been engaged in the region for a very long time, and the region is, we all know what is going on in the region. The United States has not succeeded in fixing the problems of the region, and there is, I would say, talking to my peers throughout various agencies in the U.S. government, there is a sort of a fatigue about the extent to which the U.S. can be this involved in the politics of each country and trying to fix the politics of each country. And I think you do detect a level of frustration that with all the resources that's been poured in, that the U.S. has committed, and all the blood and treasure that's been lost, the U.S. has not achieved really peace and stability throughout the region, and that causes people to rethink. Should we be this involved, and is there a point to being this involved this long in the region? So I think these are factors more than. Britain pulled out, I think, because of resource constraints in the 70s. I don't see that as a factor in the U.S. calculations. It's
Thank you.
those other factors I mentioned.
Thank you to the panelists, and thank you to the audience, and we're now going to...
And thank you, Dr. Zogby. Thank Dr. Zogby, too.